Questions for reflection. The account of the way that Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery to Egyptians out of jealousy, and how Joseph responded, is one of the great stories of the book of Genesis. They first intended to murder him and settled for the evil act of selling him into slavery to the Egyptians. Joseph heard from the Lord in dreams. He was assured that he would rise to a position of leadership. That's in Genesis 37. He received this as a blessing from God. His brothers were jealous, believing he was given an unfair advantage as a favorite son of their father Jacob. In short, sin infected the relationship. In our excerpt appointed for the first reading for Holy Mass today, Joseph had interpreted Pharaoh's dream when the Egyptian leader heard of his gifts and had him summoned from a prison. As a result of this, he found favor with the leader of the oppressor of Israel, Egypt. In fact, Joseph rose to power in Egypt. His wisdom was sought by many Egyptians, and he ends up being used by the Lord as an instrument to relieve the Egyptians from famine. Like so many of these wonderful historic accounts in the Old Testament or Hebrew scriptures, Christians can look at them as allegorical lessons as well. Notice how Joseph responded to injustice, imprisonment, and betrayal. He did not complain. He learned how to live in Egypt. In our times, we live in cultures which have lost any sense of God and are increasingly hostile to Christians, a kind of new Egypt. How are we responding? The truth is, life presents us with challenges and pain. Failure, suffering, and hardship are a part of the program. When I was a younger man, I mistakenly thought that such struggles would lessen as I grew older and learned how to live by faith with more maturity. But as I read the lives of the great heroes of our faith, I found I was wrong. In fact, the opposite seemed to be the case. The ones who were closer to the Lord seemed to struggle and suffer even more. They even came to share in his sufferings. What is different in the life of a Christian is not that struggle, failure, pain, and difficulties go away, but we change. In fact, they often become the instruments of that change and the very material with which we are made new when we learn to live by faith. Christians do not face struggle or approach suffering in the same way as those who have not yet received the gift of living faith. Living faith gives us new glasses with which to view our entire life differently because of who Jesus is and who we are becoming in him. However, that requires that we cooperate with the invitations of grace, which are present in every moment, even when they seem to be hidden. The Pharaoh told his people when they faced the problems associated with a great famine to go to Joseph. What he says, do. We need to get the example of Joseph and learn how to live in our own Egypt. Will we learn a lesson from Joseph? The psalmist David reminds us of God's sovereignty over the lives of all who submit themselves to him and put his plan over their own. In these words, Yahweh thwarts the plans of nations, frustrates the counsels of people. But Yahweh's own plan stands firm forever, his heart's counsel from age to age. See how Yahweh watches over those who fear him, those who rely on his faithful love, to rescue them from death and keep them alive in famine. Have we chosen God's plans over our own today? His plan is always the path to true freedom and flourishing. He rescues us from death and keeps us alive in famine. The Old Testament Joseph embraced his lot, rejecting the temptation to bitterness or victimhood, and came to rule in Egypt. He even forgave the brothers who sold him into slavery. Saint Joseph of the New Covenant embraced his vocation as foster father of the Messiah, Jesus, the one who would establish the new covenant on the altar of Calvary, shedding his blood out of love for the world. Both men named Joseph show us the way to live. Our gospel text is taken from St. Matthew's account of the choosing of the 12 and is sending them forth on the mission of spreading the kingdom of God. That mission continues today, and we are invited into it. In Luke's account, that's in Luke chapter 6, we read that before Jesus made the choice, he spent the whole night in prayer. Think about that. Before Jesus made this historic and eternal decision, he spent the night in prayer. I know that in his sacred humanity, he shows us the pattern for our own lives. So I ask myself, how many nights have I spent in prayer making the important decisions in my life? I'll not embarrass myself further by putting the answer to you. Throughout the accounts of the earthly life of Jesus, we find him in this kind of prayer. He lived in a continual communion with the Father. His prayer opened the heavens, healed the sick, raised the dead, brought provision to the hungry, gave him clarity for making decisions, and brought the glory of heaven to earth. Prayer still does all of this for those who learn its ways and live their lives immersed in God. Are we willing to become those kinds of men and women, true disciples